tonight's discussion is on public works contracts, and I suppose the suite of public works contracts are documents that form part of public works contracts. When we talk about pitfalls and solutions, I suppose these are the pitfalls that I've seen throughout my career working with the public works contracts since they were introduced in 2008. Some of the pitfalls at the start when they were introduced were, I suppose, quite severe and interesting. In fact, I haven't mentioned any of those here tonight. But I suppose as time went on, they leveled out. But there still, I suppose, is issues in using the documents which form part of the suite of contracts. I suppose my base qualification is quantity surveying. I was a quantity surveyor for mainly for civil engineering contractors. Did a lot of work under the public works form contract, and I suppose recently as founder of Conlex Consulting, I get involved in reviewing contract documents for clients, reviewing contract documents for contractors and stuff. Public works forms of contracts to make sure everything is, I suppose, in the right place and where it's supposed to be. So when I started drafting the slides, I was wondering, where do I start, and I thought this was a good place to start. And I suppose just before we do start, I suppose tonight's discussion is based on the CF3 civil engineering works designed by the employer. So that's what today's discussion is generally on, where the employer is responsible for the design. So this particular clause is a very important clause in the contract. It sets out a list of contract documents. It sets out the hierarchy of contract documents. And when you go and look at the list, you'll be surprised where certain documents are on the list. For example, pricing document is down towards the end, just above works proposals. The works requirements is very much down the list. The schedule is very much high on the list. Okay. I've been spending a lot of time on the schedule. I've been spending a fair bit of time on the works requirements. I'll be spending a fair bit of time on the pricing document. And you might say, well, why? The fact that it's so far down the list. But if the pricing document isn't a true reflection of the works requirements and not measured in accordance with the measurement, it is no compensation. It wasn't 5 years ago. So I will go through each of those documents bit by bit, spending varying time on each one. So the first document is the agreement, and it really kind of sets the scene, I suppose, for tonight's discussion, sets the scene for the project as a whole. It's what both parties have agreed to do effectively. So the contractor shall execute and complete the works subject to and in accordance with the contract. The employer should pay the contractor the contract sum. It's quite simple. Again, this is in the agreement, the top ranked document in the suite of contracts documents, and this is Article 1 and 2. What's important here is that the works are the works requirements. Okay, that's what the term works is defined as, the works requirements, and that's what the contractor effectively is obligated to construct for the contract sum. The letter of acceptance, again, ranked just below the agreement, so it's ranked second in line and at the same level as the schedule. What I would like to point out here is that with the letter of acceptance, you also have post-tender for clarifications, which also form part of the contract and will take priority over contract, works requirements, and the pricing document. So be careful what you put into your post-tender clarifications. That's hugely important. Sometimes you get a lot of stuff dumped into like minutes of meetings and things like that, various letters. If you have the wrong stuff inside there, it could be certainly changing the risk profile of the contract unintentionally and changing the parties' duties and obligations as a result. Okay, so be careful with your post-tender clarifications as to what you put in there. The tender and schedule, for anybody who don't know, that's the front page of the tender and schedule. So that's what it looks like, just in case you're searching for the documents after tonight's discussion. There can be a lot of issues with the schedule and in populating part 1 of the schedule, which has to be populated by the employer, okay? I kind of see this schedule as being kind of the engine room effectively of the suite of documents where very important information gets put into the schedule that obviously the contract refers to and things like that, you know. And I'll go through again, based on my experience, the issues that I have seen on a regular basis. Scope of the ER's authority in relation to issuing change orders. The employer is supposed to insert a figure there in the blank, as you can see, next to the euro sign. Very often that figure can be quite low. A lot of time people don't look to see what the figure is. Very often you'll see the ER issue instructions above their authority, which could have serious consequences, especially if the contractor doesn't pay it. Where the ER effectively has stepped outside its obligations under the contract. Has serious consequences for the contractor if it acts on instructions that the ER has not authority to give. So have a look at your at the schedule. Have a look to see what the limit is. Based on my experience, that can be done with 2 or 3 grand. 4 grand. You get why you should under that. You know, so if the figure is too low, go back to the employer, get it increased. Okay, depending on the nature of your project. Probably one of the most important parts of tonight's discussion is the works requirements box, and that's what it is. It's a box, but it's a very, very important blue box, and it's very important that the correct information goes into that blue box. Just remember what I just said at the start. That's what the contractor is obliged to do, whatever is inside that box for the contract. So that's what the OGP, the Office of Government Procurement, suggests you put into the box, which is fine. Clear, concise, and simple. Very often, the first thing I will do is I look at the box, see what's in there. I see volume A. What's the next thing you do? You look for volume A. What do you find in volume A? You could find loads of things inside volume A. You mightn't find volume A at all. It mightn't exist. Bear in mind, this is one of the highest ranking documents in your suite of contracts. Okay. Volume A should only include the drawings and the specification. That's all that should be included inside it. Okay. This is a real life situation. It's not something that I typed in myself. It's a contract that I was reviewing recently. What's wrong with that works requirements box? So the works requirements are as scheduled and included in Volume A, Part A, Volume A, Part B, Volume B, and Volume C. So that's what the contractor is contracted to do. Volume C is the pricing document. Volume B is the contract, tender schedule, PSC appointment, and rates of pay. So now the contractor is contracted to construct what's in the drawings and in the pricing document. What if one is inconsistent with the other? We have confusion. Where we have confusion, we have disputes with compensation events, etc., etc., etc. Very simple thing to get right, but very, very, very often it's one of the pitfalls. This is another incorrect works requirements box. This has serious implications on this particular project. And this is slightly worse again. It includes the pricing document, but look what it also includes: the site investigation and other background information. On that particular project, the risk with regards to ground conditions was the employers. Site investigation showed rock, which was very fractured in the site investigation, but the entire project ended up encountering an awful lot of rock that wasn't fractured. So the site investigation was different to what actually was in the works requirements. Has the works requirements changed? Yeah, serious confusion, serious headaches because of texts put into the wrong place. We also have a pricing document box, and this is a screenshot of the actual OGP template itself. So you all know this. If you hit on the gray shaded area, it'll give you a drop down menu there. You can't really see it, but there are the various different types of method of measurements. Okay. All I would say in relation to this is make sure you pick the correct method of measurement. make sure that the method of measurement used to draft the pricing document is that method of measurement. I've seen, let's just say for argument's sake, the TII method of measurement put into the schedule, and I've seen the pricing document being measured under that form. Schedule takes precedence over the pricing document. If the pricing document isn't measured correctly, it's a compensation event. That could turn the job completely on its head in relation to compensation. It's because the bill is completely not measured correctly because it's worked off the wrong method of measurement. Simple, but again, pick the correct method of measurement. Make sure the method of measurement that's been used in the pricing document is that particular method of measurement. Okay. This is where I think the OGP has created the confusion itself in relation to the date of substantial completion. Very often, it obviously is important that we all know and everyone is clear as to what the date of substantial completion is, because it's had many implications. You know, the flexibility period, release of retention, loads of implications as to what the substantial completion date is. This again is a screenshot of the OGP standard template, and it says the last day of period starting on the contract date or date. I find that confusing. But what I will say is that it's using a defined contract term in the box, which is the contract date. The contract date is the date the employer issued a letter of acceptance. Fair enough. But I find that text a bit confusing, okay? This is another real life situation. Again, what's wrong with this box? So here, the employer has said that the date for substantial completion is 30 weeks after the date of commencement of the works. What does the commencement of the works mean? It's not a defined contract term. We have confusion straight away, okay? When you're defining the date for substantial completion, keep it simple. Use defined contract terms in that particular box. I give an example down the bottom there, which to me is clear and simple. It has got two defined contract terms in it, both days and contract date. So the date for substantial completion is 356 days after contract date. That's clear. There is no confusion. It's not rocket science. The famous daily delay rate. This is a particular clause or statement in the schedule, and I'll read it because it's easier than just explain it. It says in subclause 10.7, the amount to be added for daily cost is in accordance with subclause 10.7.1. 1. The expenses unavoidably incurred as a result of delay to the date of substantial completion, or subclause 10.7.12, the daily rate tendered by the contractor in the schedule. And this is the important bit. Delete as applicable. If neither deleted, subclause 10.7.1.2, the daily delay rate tendered by the contractor in the schedule part 2D is to be read as deleted. So if you don't delete neither, well then the rate tendered by the contractor for a daily delay rate is deemed to be deleted. That might not be the intention of the employer. What happens very often? Neither is deleted. And obviously, the delay in the project, the contractor is not obliged to use a daily delay rate that it has tendered, okay? Contractors, what I would say is make sure you tender a realistic daily delay rate, because you know you're leaving yourself open if you don't. What I would say to employers is when you are putting quantities, notional quantities in your daily delay or daily delay quantities in the instructions to tenders, put a reasonable quantity in there. What I have seen is large quantities of days inside the instructions to tenders. That is only encouraging contractors to put in a low rate because they want to be competitive. If they see a high quantity in there, they'll put down a low rate. So try and be realistic if you can as to what, based on the nature of the project, as to what the realistic daily delay rate be. Contractors tender percentage addition to the cost of labor. This is part 2 of the schedule, which part 2 of the schedule has to be filled in by the contractor. Very often you see this left blank. I get the feeling a lot of times people don't realize the implications of leaving it blank. But basically, putting it simple, if you leave it blank, all you get paid for a compensation event is the SEO rate, which I think is approximately around €20 per hour. The last time, but I was going to wait 21 euro an hour. That's all you can get paid. If the ER is structured to do an additional work under clause 10.6.4. That's what you'll get if you leave it blank. So be careful leaving it blank. Next document is the contract. So we've discussed the agreement. We've discussed the post-tender clarification with the letter of acceptance and the schedule, which are at the same level. Below that is the contract, okay? So the contract is ranked lower than the schedule, which we just discussed, okay? I don't have a huge amount to say about the contract. Otherwise, I'd have to go through every clause in the contract, which we don't have time to do tonight. That's the front page of the contract in case you're looking for that particular document. All I would say, I feel myself is well written. It's in plain English. There is very little confusion with the contract itself. It can't be amended without OGP approval. It's very much heavy on procedure. All I would say is that parties should follow procedure. If you don't follow procedure in the public works form of contract, you could be waving goodbye to various rights that you have under the contract. And I've picked out two particular clauses, I suppose, in relation to that, which is one is 10.6, which is the adjustments to the contract sum, heavy on procedure with regards to notification of compensation and delay events, substantiations of those events, determination of those events by the employer, all has to be done within a certain period of time. If you don't comply with clause 10.6, very difficult to turn around halfway through the job and kind of say, well, we want full compliance at this stage. If you haven't been compliant, you could be in danger of waiving your rights to come back at a later stage and say, sorry guys, you weren't in compliance here. The same would apply to employers' claims under clause 10.9. If the employer wants to seek a reduction to the contract sum or seek an amount due back from the contractor, it has to notify the contractor as soon as practicable. That's not defined under the contract. How soon is as soon as practicable? I would say you wouldn't want to be veering too far away from the timelines in clause 10.3. Very often you'll see employers stockpiling claims. But we want to see how the project is going to go. They probably don't want to upset the contractor by making claims against them. And then towards the end, you might see a lot of employers' claims being issued towards the contractor. If they deviate a good bit away from the timelines under 10.3, I would say that the employer could be in danger of not being able to enforce those claims against the contractor. Okay. So all I would say in relation to the contract is follow the procedures by the letter of the law. If you don't follow the procedures, you could be leaving yourself open down the track. Works requirements. Again, just bear in mind where we are in the ranking of documents. We just discussed the contract, we just discussed the schedule, letter of acceptance, we've discussed the agreement. So we're down kind of in the engine room effectively of the suite of contract documents, and a hugely important I suppose, piece of the contract documents to get right, okay? We've already discussed why the works requirements are important. It's basically what the contractor is obligated to do. And that's again set out in Article 1 of the agreement. I already mentioned that it should just include drawings and specifications. And that's what the contractor is obliged to do. It's obliged to set out the works to the points, lines, and levels in the works requirements. That's the contractor's obligation under 7.7. If the points, lines and levels aren't in the works requirements, I suppose the contractor is entitled to ask for them. Okay. This is a playing field which is all over the place, as you can see. The reason I put this particular picture here is that I see one of the reasons for the works requirements is to create a level playing field of tenderers when they're tendering. You know, the works requirements, including the drawings and the spec, need to be clearly defined. They need to clearly define the employer's requirements. There should be no confusion as to what the contractor is being asked to tender for. If you have a poorly drafted set of works requirements, the playing field will be all over the place. So what will happen as a result of that? And one point to remember there is I spent most of my life working as a contractor, and I work very closely with the tendering people. And the last thing, believe it or not, contractors want to see is a poor set of documents. And I tell you why. If they see a poorly drafted set of documents, the first question that they'll ask themselves is, what view are our competitors going to make of this? Will they put 0 against it or next to 0? What will they do? So there's a guessing game going on. There's confusion. That will result in the price coming in that won't reflect obviously the employer's requirements, because there's items missing in the works requirements. It will certainly encourage low cost tendering, because there will be commercial views taken because of poor set of documents, and it will certainly result in a large number of compensation and delay events when the project gets up and running. So tenders need to have a level playing field. They all need to know exactly what the scope of work they've been asked to price. Okay. Enabling works contracts, they're starting to be used more often now than they used to be. It's a recommendation of the OGP guidance documents to do enabling works contracts to allow the designer complete design, which is a good idea. If there's confusion there, let's do a small enabling works contract first before we actually complete our design, and then ask the contractors to tender on the level playing field. And I just got this picture here just to explain what I'm trying to get to. And this again is based on a real life situation where, you know, a designer was asked to design the works or put together the works requirements for the rehabilitation of an old bridge that's full of ivy. So the designer can't see what's behind the ivy. The designer will do the best he can. It'll put the documents together. It might even put things into the pricing document that aren't in the works requirements. We'll discuss that in a minute, what the implications are of that. But more often than not, you will have a set of works requirements that won't reflect the end product effectively. So in that sort of situation, an enabling works should have taken place to strip the bridge of ivy, allow the designer see what needs to be done, what repointing needs to be done, what pieces of stonework needs to be replaced, what parts of the bridge need to be rebuilt. And then we have a level playing field, work from, everybody knows what's the price, there's no confusion, there's no guessing, there's no cost tendering, and you certainly should have been able to reduce the number of compensation events on the project. Adequate site investigation, hugely important for designers, obviously, as well, and it's hugely important to have a very detailed, depending on the type of project, of course, a very detailed site investigation to allow everybody to assess the risk, both the designers, both the tenderers, and both the employer, to be able to assess the risk that's there. Okay. Try and do as much deep site investigation as you can. Take into account that site investigation in the design of the project. If it's next to impossible or very difficult to construct, what you want, what you've designed because of what's in the ground. Again, maybe an enabling works package might be a good idea. Isolate it out, get it done under a different procurement method or whatever, but lumping it into fixed price lump sum contract, isn't the way to go, because you'll have an incomplete design, you'll have clashes, etc., etc., etc. So again, have a think about for that particular issue. Popping up incomplete works requirements with statements in the pricing document should be avoided. You see that an awful lot, where the person drafting the pricing document, because of their experience, probably are aware that the works requirements are possibly incomplete. They put items into the pricing document to, I suppose, close off that particular area. In my view, there's no point in doing that. So it's a waste of time. Again, the contractor is only contracted to construct the works requirements. Okay, if you read TII preamble to the pricing document, and we'll discuss this in more detail later, TII method of measurement, which is normally used on government civil engineering projects, and this is a piece out of it, which basically says if you're reading an item in your pricing document and you want to price it and you want to figure out exactly what to allow for, well, the TII preamble tells you the nature and extent of the work described in the pricing document is to be ascertained by reference to the works requirements. But if there's nothing in the works requirements, what do you do? How do you price that particular item in the pricing document? What will probably happen is that you will have very low price against that item. So what's the point of putting it into the pricing document, because it's never going to be used? Transferring risk. I hope there's nobody in the room who actually put this into a specification. Transferring risk with statements in the works requirements should also be avoided. Remember, what I mean by that is, trying to put items into the works requirements to shut off compensation events, or transfer risk over to tenderers with regards to design or the ground conditions, won't work, bearing in mind that the works requirements is very much down the pecking order with regards to contract documents. It's below the contract, it's below the schedule. The contract has already told us that the employer is responsible for the design. The schedule probably would have also told us that the employer takes the risk with regards to ground conditions. And that was the situation on this particular project. But yet we have a statement in the specification which says the final location for pipelines, manholes, shafts, etc., shown on the drawing will be agreed on site between the contractor and the employer, its representative, to avoid any obstructions existing pipes and services. If so directed, the contractor should set out his preferred route for all pipelines, even though the contractor is not the designer, and the selected routes of pipelines and the location of manholes and chambers should be agreed on site between the contractor and the ER. Contractor should do site investigation, basically trying to figure out where everything should go. And he should not require a change order to be issued by the employer's representative. It's not worth the paper it's written on. You're achieving nothing by putting a statement like that into the works requirements, because it's inconsistent with the schedule, it's inconsistent with the contract, and they take precedence effectively. Yeah, I've kind of said all that already. I mean, I already mentioned that the contract would say, for argument's sake, that the contractor is entitled to set out works with points, lines, and levels in the works requirements, which is a complete contradiction to what statement we just saw. Okay. We're still on the works requirements, and this was the works requirements drawing, which included site investigation information on it. But it didn't, because I was reviewing that contract, and obviously I told them to take site investigation information off the drawing. Again, it's a similar situation where you're putting background information or site investigation information into the works requirements. Again, these are real life situations. This does happen quite often. Okay. This is ranked very much down the pecking order, but it's hugely important because if you get the pricing document wrong, it's a compensation. Get the description wrong, compensation event. Get the quantities wrong, it's a compensation event. And when I say get the descriptions wrong, I mean get it wrong when you're measuring the drafting the bill in accordance with the correct method of measurement. Okay. So the pricing document must accurately reflect the work's requirements and must be measured in accordance with the chosen method of measurement, either the TII, ARM4, CESM, or whatever. Okay. Because if you don't do it, the schedule, again, which is a high ranking document, will tell us under schedule part 1K, item 17, it's a compensation. It wasn't a compensation event up to about 4 or 5 years ago. That is, the OGP changed that. Yeah, you could argue a lot of the skill set probably, might have left the industry during that time, but it's back on the table now. Okay. The most commonly used method of measurement used in civil engineering projects, I think probably will agree, I hope, is the TII method of measurement. And that's a typical structure of the TII method of measurement, where you have the unit, the measurement, the itemization, where you have to, itemize the description based on the group and the feature, and then you have the item coverage for that. Okay. The standard pricing document drafting, in my view, is poor, and there's various reasons for that. Okay. Works requirements not complete when the pricing document has been drafted. Obviously, there's time pressures. You could have a situation where the pricing document is being drafted in parallel with the works requirements. I imagine there could be situations where the pricing document is being drafted before the works requirements, maybe possibly. That's probably one of the reasons why pricing document drafting is under pressure. TII method of measurement is not being taught at all level. I'm a QS. I certainly wasn't taught TII method of measurement, and I'm fairly sure it's not being taught still to this day. In fact, I was with an institution not so long ago reviewing their particular course, and it was one of the recommendations that I made. And the people sitting in front of me didn't even know what I was talking about in relation to the TII method of measurement. And you can imagine the amount of work that we're constructing in this industry using the TII method of measurement. And a lot of people don't know how to use it. And I nearly include myself in that. It's a lot of people find it confusing. Okay. The rules are not easy to follow in my view. The TII guidance could be better. It can be confusing at times. The simplistic approach of the TII method of measurement, I would argue, encourages sloppy drafting. What you find sometimes, for argument's sake, is if there is changes away from the standard TII specification, you'll find maybe items added onto the existing list or never-ending list of coverage items in the TII method of measurement. And I mean, the fundamental principle of a method of measurement or method of measurement or pricing document, that matter, what is it? What are we trying to do with a pricing document? What's the purpose of the method of measurement? Is to provide clarity, again, going back to that level playing field for tenderers so that they can look at the pricing document, and when they're pricing, they can see a description and they can relate that description back to the drawing specification and look at the method of measurement and look at the coverage items and know exactly what they have to price. You would argue that's not a lot to ask for, but obviously I understand there's lots of reasons why it's not getting done, some of which I've listed out here, but that's, in theory, that's the way it's supposed to work. One of the things I want to discuss today or this evening in relation to the pricing document is the preamble. The preamble to the pricing document. What is it? Why is it needed? Probably the most important part of the pricing document is the preamble. It's often overlooked. Sometimes you get pricing documents and there is no preamble, doesn't exist. And very often the preamble doesn't include information that should be in there. Very important information. So why is it important? It's a fundamental requirement of the TII method of measurement, and that's a particular recommendation under the CCRMP. You can search that up under section 9. The matter set out under the heading Preamble to the Bill of Quantities, item 1 to 17 hereafter, are always to be included as a preamble to the Bill of Quantities of the pricing document. Additional numbered preamble may be included as necessary, and I'll get onto the last bit here in a second. But every pricing document should have a preamble. Doesn't often happen, and if it does happen, the preamble doesn't include correct information. Why is it preamble so important? It effectively serves as an introduction to tenderers as to the makeup of the pricing document, an explanation around the pricing document in relation to descriptions, item coverages, etc. It gives them, it alerts them to additional coverage items that are put into the contract, which have to be stated clearly in the preamble. It'll tell tenderers about the nature and extent of the work that is supposed to be ascertained from the work's requirements. It'll give information in relation to the tender's rates, what they're to include for. They're supposed to be fully inclusive of the items between I and X1B. It tells tenders that quantities are to be computed net. It tells tenders how they should deal with ground conditions, maintaining flows, etc. And one very important thing, I was looking at a pricing document today where there was 350,000 cubes of hard material in the pricing document. What's hard material? That's what the preamble will tell you. Preamble will tell you what hard material is. It could be anything. Be very hard material, kind of hard material. That's where you tell the tenderer what hard material is. Okay. This is hugely important. I'm kind of conscious that this is probably small bit heavy going, but just bear with me a second, right? The preamble is where information is provided on site-specific rogue items. What are site-specific rogue items? I won't read out that, but I'll just try and explain it, okay? The TII method of measurement, our publications tell us that when they were putting together their method of measurement, right, they based it on the standard TII specification, and they based it on the standard TII construction details. So when they were drafting their method of measurement, that's what they based it on. But they're now saying here, if you change or add to the TII specification because of the nature of your project or because of the specific nature of the works, you need to make corresponding changes to the TII method of measurement. And changes that you make to the TII method of measurement need to be reflected in preamble. That's where you alert the tenderers to these new rogue items, site-specific items that you have put into the pricing document, or that you should have put into the pricing document, and that you have explained in the preamble. There is, to be honest, there's a bit of confusion as to maybe just jump forward a second, right? Just to explain this. What I mean by site-specific changes to the TII specification. Here we have a list of contract-specific additions to TII specification. We see this quite often in specifications where, you know, because of the nature of the job, you know, we've got things there like archaeology, with things like, you know, controlling of dust, security, or whatever. These are all, I suppose, additions to the TII specification that the designer has put in because of the nature of the project and things like that, which is fine because, you know, TII can't think of everything. So it allows the designers to add to the TII specification, which is fine. But as I said, you need to make corresponding changes to the method of measurement. If you don't, you will have site-specific specifications that haven't been itemized in the pricing document, where the contractor has been given no opportunity to price. And therefore you have a compensation of it. Okay. So one of the most important things to take away from today is that if you're making site-specific changes to the TI specification, you need to make corresponding changes to the standard TII method of measurement. And you need to highlight those changes in your preamble. Hugely important. It happens a bit. Most of the time it doesn't happen at all. And you see then, for argument's sake, where a contractor in the specification is being asked to provide a shuttle bus from point A to point B for 6 months, or 2 shuttle buses. Contractor goes off, provides the shuttle bus because that's what the works requirement says. Then the contractor is going, where am I getting paid for the shuttle bus? Should the shuttle bus be itemized in the pricing document? The TI just told us that the method of measurement is only based on the standard TI specification. If we change the standard TI specification, you need to make alterations to the method of measurement, and you need to put in items in your pricing document for items like that. And you need to put an explanation in your preamble in relation to the shuttle bus. What is deemed to be included, what are the coverage items of the shuttle bus, etc., etc. Bit confusing, but it's important that we get ahead of that. Okay. That I think is the end. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it wasn't too heavy going.